I'm Tarik O'Regan, I'm a composer, and I've written the pieces Triptych and the Ecstasies above, which are going to be performed at Carnegie Hall by DCINY on November 15 this year, and I'm very excited by it. Triptych began life with the first movement, really, and that was a piece called Threnody, and that was for the Choir of London in 2004. And then the other two movements were added on later. They were a separate piece written for Portsmouth Grammar School, and the two pieces were put together, and because they were three movements, I called them Triptych. And basically they just look at the question that we probably all ask ourselves, regardless of our upbringing, our faith, if we have one or not, which is, what happens when we close our eyes for the last time, if you like, what happens on the other side. And I think what I wanted to do was draw the similarities from a range of text sources, which are, some are secular, some are sacred, they're from a range of traditions. And I think we live in a very difficult time at the moment where we seem to be focused much more on division rather than embracing the diversity that we live in. And actually there's a remarkable unity in these beliefs that we have, regardless of how one's brought up or what one's background is. And that's really what I wanted to get across in the piece, that although it is a piece ostensibly about what happens when we die, it's a very uplifting piece. It's a very fast-moving piece. The music is influenced heavily by various loves of mine, such as sort of rock and roll music, but especially rock music from sort of the 70s, a bit of my own upbringing in North Africa, and also the music I learned and listened to when I was at college and university in the UK, so a lot of that sort of English choral tradition. So it's sort of all fused together. So on the one hand you might think it's a dark subject, but it isn't. It's a very light, and I mean that in the broadest sense, piece of music. And it's a very uplifting piece of music, and it's one that I hope speaks to people of all backgrounds, of any faith or of none. So one thing that you should know about Triptych is that it's for a large chorus and a large string orchestra, and the string writing is very percussive, so it's not a very lyrical, predominantly it's not lyrical string writing. The middle movement is, but the outer movements are very, very percussive, very, very driving. And that combination with quite lyrical choral writing, I think, is what has attracted people to the piece in the past, and why I think people are drawn to it today. The Ecstasies above is also for strings and voices, but in this case it's a string quartet matched against a chorus divided into two and 8 soloists. So it's a sort of complicated piece, and it sets a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, the great story writer and poet. And from a European perspective, we very much think of him as part of the line of European poetry, heavily influenced of European poetry, rather than the sort of horror short story writer that I think perhaps he has more of a reputation out here. And I came across the idea of setting him and his poetry to music because near where I live on the Upper West Side in Manhattan is Edgar Allan Poe Street, and I kept walking past it, and I thought I'd go and check out his stuff at the time that I was writing this piece, and it was a commission for the Yale University Schola Cantorum. And this piece is really, musically, it's about texture and combination. So it still has that driving music that is very much a part of Triptych, and very much something that has always interested me, that the fact that a lot of choral music is very slow, and I've always wanted to write fast, vigorous music, so there's a lot of that in it. But the main thing is that it's about alternating textures, and with the string quartet and the soloists and the chorus, there are tremendously large number of permutations and combinations that you hear throughout the piece. It's perpetually shifting. Soloists here, groups of soloists, big chorus, sometimes a solo violin, the quartet acting like a sort of motor rhythm sometimes in the piece. So it's always shifting. And the poem that I set is a poem called Israfel by Edgar Allan Poe. And it links very similarly to Triptych, which is about someone on Earth thinking about something that isn't on Earth, whereas Triptych, it's thinking about what happens when we die. In Israfel, the protagonist, the person who's reading the poem, or the person who's reading or saying the poem, looks up at this angel, Israfel, and hears some amazing and beautiful music that is being sung by the angel. And the fundamental question that the poem asks is, this music is so beautiful and wonderful, I wish it could be closer to me. And this question is, if I bring the music closer, if I bring the angel closer to me, will I end up bringing it too close? And will that magic die when it's on Earth? In other words, do we need distance between our dreams and our reality? And that's really all the piece is about. So they're both pieces about here, our everyday life on Earth, and thinking about things beyond that. And Triptych is a very broad question, and Israfel is a lot narrower, but I think they share that universal theme. I would give two pieces of advice, but the first one is, for a piece like Ecstasies Above, the piece only makes sense in its entirety when everything comes together. And I think a lot of simpler choral pieces immediately make sense the first time you read it through. You think, oh, I get what this piece is, I understand it. My experience with Ecstasies Above, and this is a piece you've got to understand that it's performed a lot. You know, it's performed several times a week somewhere in the world. It makes no sense when they first get together to rehearse it, because it's all about these differing textures. And it's all about these differing elements and how they all come together. And you maybe think of yourself as an actor or an actress in a movie, and the movie script is so, secret that you don't even get to see the whole script. All you get is your part, and you learn your part and you do your part. But until the movie comes out, the whole thing doesn't quite make sense. In my experience with performers of Triptych, be they the string quartet players or the singers or the soloists, is that there's a sudden magical moment when everything's on stage for the first time and it all clicks together. And I think my advice is just be aware of that when you're learning your part and when you're working on it, that it may not quite add up at that point, but the payoff is there. I promise you and I assure you, because I thought long and hard about it writing the piece. So that would be one advice for the more complicated works of mine. So my other advice for a piece like Triptych, which is actually much simpler in the vocal writing than my other works, the string parts are difficult, is that I think people hear me speak and they know that I grew up in the UK and think that a lot of my music is based entirely in that English choral tradition, which is very ethereal and peaceful and elegant and polite and quiet. Okay, you can throw all that away. There are bits of it in Triptych, but really this is a piece born out of that moment I think we all have when, wherever we grow up, we first encounter music from a slightly earlier generation. In my case, it was my parents' record collection. And my parents listened to Led Zeppelin, The Who, and The Stones. And that has always stuck with me as one of my earliest musical memories, was hearing this very strident, powerful music that is very, very direct. And that is, more than anything, is the music behind the vocal writing in Triptych. So when you see this score in front of you that may look English and polite, don't think of that. Think of English and not polite. In other words, Robert Plant, or whoever it is that you want, Roger Daltrey, or whoever it is that you think of from that era. Or think of the music that you listen to now for pleasure that is, not concert music, that is not classical music. Because that's where the passion, I think, of Triptych came from. And I think that's why that piece is another one that seems to be done quite a lot, is that yes, it's a concert piece, the notes are written down, there's an orchestra playing, there are people singing with scores. But, you know, for that brief moment of time that you're on stage, I think everyone's a rock star. Thanks for listening. I am super excited to be joining you. I'm going to be there on November 15th. It's going to be amazing, and I can't wait, and I will see you there at Carnegie Hall.